go ahead and get started now. Welcome to ACE UX Hiring with Applied Design Thinking with Malini Rao. Malini is the Associate Director of UX at Ipswich Incorporated, an IT management software company. A UX veteran of 19 years, Malini has designed product and experiences for diverse organizations, giants like Siemens Medical Systems and Oracle, technology leaders with cult following like Red Hat, and also smaller, nimble organizations like Acquia and Ipswich. The chief tenet that Malini advocates is for creative adaptation. It is her proposal that out-of-the-box creativity should not be limited to the design of efficient and delightful product interfaces alone, but also to the methods of doing the design itself. So it's my pleasure to present Malini Rao.
Hello everybody, hope you're having a wonderful conference day today, the largest yet for UXPA Boston Guru. Thank you for being here and welcome to my talk. I know it's the end of the day, but hopefully it's still something that's useful to all of you, because I'm going to be talking about something that we all struggle with quite a bit, and that's UX hiring. My talk will outline things that I have learned and devised as a UX team member at companies like Oracle and Red Hat, and also as a UX hiring manager at companies like Acquia and Ipswich. I want to set some expectations. I'm not going to be revealing any secrets of getting those star designers that we all want before the competition. What I am going to propose, though, is to use a mindset that we're all very familiar with. To use design thinking to hang on to your hiring goals as you go through this bumpy ride that UX hiring can be. I understand that not all organizations may have a UX hiring manager outside of HR, and that's okay, because I think we can bank on our design thinking and methodologies to lead us to our hiring goals. I want to start my talk with something that we all know. We UXers are in demand, and if you're ever in doubt, you only need to do a cursory internet search to reveal the trends for the last year. UX jobs are at the very top when it comes to roles in demand. So out of curiosity, I entered user experience on Indeed.com, and I limited my search to the Boston area and also to just the last 15 days in terms of the postings. And that revealed 2,278 UX jobs. Wow, no wonder we're in demand. Now the bad news. If you're hiring, your rec is one of those 2,278. All too frequently, I'm in recruiting events where the turnout is like that. Employers go set up their tables, bring out their best swag, and yet it's hard to attract the right candidate. Even that little guy seems to be losing his charm. According to a Glassdoor study, the more complex a job, the longer it takes to hire. Now that's reasonable, it makes sense. According to this study as well, it takes about 19.3 days to hire a UX designer. That's only about 3 times as long as it takes to hire a bartender. Go figure. So, but I understand that the UX umbrella is a really large one, right? So I'm not sure that if this study really breaks it down by level or by type of role, whether it was permanent or contract or anything like that. But if you're looking to add best-of-breed talent to your team for a full-time position, maybe senior level, it seems a little too speedy. If you are looking at these kinds of timelines, then maybe phone interviews or interviews in the speed dating kind of format, those may all be sufficient. But for the former scenario, it almost seems like a paper bag speed dating format, where you don't even know each other's needs or what it is or who it is that you're hiring. So for discerning teams, it's quite common to spend maybe 3 to 6 months and considering numerous candidates before making a hire. It is for these kinds of scenarios where design thinking and design methods can be very helpful. Think about this. We UXers, we are endlessly strategic, and we have so many tools in our design toolbox when it comes to doing user experience for our products or services. But when it comes to hiring, we get busy completing templates and following antiquated corporate hiring policies. We don't stop to think if it's working for us, if it was designed for any particular business function even. And for some reason, we don't think of adding talent to our teams as another design project, the UX hiring design project. Now, depending on your environment, this UX hiring design project could be something that is shared and is collaborative, perhaps even influence the general hiring in your company. Or it can be completely private, and it can be interwoven with the existing hiring process that's in your company. And the only people that need to know is you and maybe a couple members from your UX team. So there's no really organization buy-in or change that you need to effect in order to get started with this. Again, I want to emphasize that my talk is not about proposing an alternate revolutionary way to do UX hiring. It is to propose that we have to remind ourselves that we can use our design tools to not just solve problems for user experience, but also beyond. So for instance, when it comes to hiring, maybe I invite you to just stop and think about each phase in this common, well-understood hiring process, and think about the tools and techniques that you may already have that you can use in order to make that work better for you. Most corporate hiring processes follow an outline like this. I'm sorry, the font is too small, but we all know it. So a need is felt and acknowledged, and then a position is posted, and then candidates are funneled through an interview process. That's typical. Drawing parallels with the design process, basically then you can break it down into a requirements phase, followed by the design and execution of the hiring, and eventually your final result, which is your new hire. So in the rest of my talk, I'll be stopping to think about each of these phases and how we can interrelate design thinking with existing processes and people involved. Starting at the beginning, where most design processes start with requirements gathering and analysis, this is the phase where we clarify what is the problem that we're trying to solve. Said in another way, it's the phase where we outline the needs that the design has to address. So in our UX hiring design project, we can do that by asking an all-important question. What am I looking for in my new hire? Simple as this sounds, this question is actually very hard to answer. That is why most people begin by digging out an old job description, or perhaps beginning to write one. In my opinion, this is like creating a high-fidelity mock-up before your requirements are being laid out for you. It's premature to write a job description when your team is not sure about what it is that it wants in their new hire. This definition, whether it's formalized into some kind of a candidate proto-persona, or if it's notes scribbled in your notebook, it doesn't matter, but I think that's critical for everything else that I will say in my talk today. So if there's only one takeaway from this talk, it is to force yourself to answer this question. What am I looking for in my new hire? It's this simple thing that we all too frequently neglect to do, and that leads us awry. So how do we answer this hard question? So for this, I recommend following Damien Newman's squiggle of the design process. And as in the squiggle, I stop messy. And I start by listing out all kinds of attributes that I'm looking for in my new hire, but based on several different perspectives. For instance, do you anticipate your new hire to be working on, say, an existing website, or a new product, or a new next generation application? What kinds of skills will they need in order to handle a project like that? Next, who will they be working with? Is it a sluggish team that needs a boost? Or is it a team that's going so fast you can't keep up? Are there any dominant personalities in the mix that the new hire needs to have certain skills in order to survive? Also, who is in the UX team? What are the skills do you want to add so that you can round out your team? Also, if they're working with other designers that are already on your team, then what kinds of skills can complement them? This next thing, organization and culture, I cannot overemphasize. So I'd I'd recommend, if a hiring manager or any person that's responsible for hiring has spent some time in the organization that they're hiring for and experienced the culture as an insider and are intimately aware of it. This is also the reason why I feel like an external recruiting agency, especially if it's exclusively them hiring, it's less effective. Also, last but not least, in this private design project, you can take your personal preferences into account as well. It's likely that you either inherited the team or you've not had a chance to influence the team, build up, but now you do. And you can add those elements that you need in order to be successful in your mission in that organization. So based on all of these various perspectives, I begin to put down my laundry list or my wish list, depending on how you want to think about it. Here are two examples. This was a time when I was hiring for two positions at the same time. And the difference here is that each list is very specific. In fact, it's even titled with the position, the level, and the product for which I was hiring. So it is rooted in the realities of the project, of the team, and the organization. And in building these lists, I'm not just trying to be specific about the needs, but also distinguishing between them. And even though this is a laundry list, I'm already beginning to think about what my must-haves are and in comparison to other traits that are nice to have. Now, you might be looking at this and thinking, that looks like a regular job description that I see, and the line items are pretty standard. But that's just it. People use these as job descriptions. They're not written in any way to either attract or resonate with the types of candidates that you're looking for. And this is not meant to be a job description. This is special because it's not generic. It is extremely specific and rooted in the realities of your project. For this reason too, I think you can leverage your team, UX and beyond, to kind of contribute and become part of the hiring process and come up with this wish list. And that's because it's stemming out of the weeds and this is their daily reality and these are the people that they will end up working with anyways. So, and as is common with design practice, after you break things down, you put things back together, you synthesize. And that's exactly what I would recommend as my next step. So you may have a long wish list. Now's the time to distill that down into an internal brief, maybe a paragraph or so long. This still is not the job description, right? So this is where you're encapsulating your needs, and this will serve as your North Star for what can be a long hiring process and help you stay focused on what it is that you were initially looking for. This also eventually will become the basis of a measurement scale, but more on that later. So now with the clarity that you have around what it is that you're looking for, you can go target your ideal candidate. Now's the time to bring out that job description. So I'm not actually going to be spending time in this talk to tell you how to write an effective job description. I think there's several resources online available. Jared Spool did a talk and an article about that. I recommend you go check that out. But once you have your job description, in addition to any places that your company might, as part of the process, post your openings and make sure that you identify the right channels. You may have to help your recruiters help you because they may not be used to hiring for the UX domain. Also, going back to those recruiting events and the low turnout that I mentioned earlier, with the clarity about who it is that you need, you may decide or you may find out that those guys are not even at those recruiting events, right? So maybe they're doing design and are happy somewhere. And so you may need to tap your network and not just position your organization and the opportunity, but also convince them and perhaps seek the candidates that are not seeking change. Drawing it all back to design, I think basically you want to be user-centered with your job description. You want to be efficient with how you go after your candidates, and you want to attempt to delight in making those potential matches that were not expected. I know I have not given you too many details on all of these hard steps, but the purpose of this talk is to give you a framework to utilize design thinking as part of your hiring effort. You can fill in the details any way you want. The chief takeaway is that although these steps are extremely challenging, the clarity about what you're looking for gives you the footholds that you need to get the process going. So once you do have portfolios and candidates coming in for consideration, now assuming it does take 3 to 6 months and you're considering quite a lot of profiles, it pays to be organized. Nothing fancy here, it's just a spreadsheet. And it doesn't matter that you can't read it, but the last 2 columns basically, this has served me well and I just wanted to share that with you. I keep track of my thoughts as every candidate is going through the hiring process, and that helps me build a story. And then I also record the next steps and I date it so that I know if it's time to follow up with the recruiter or the candidate, things like that. Just things to keep you organized and keep the process moving. Another added benefit of an artifact like this, over time as I've hired for different organizations, I've noticed the same profiles come by for consideration. And it's interesting from time to time to go back to an artifact and say, what did I think of this person then? Have I changed my mind now? Is this a better fit? So it becomes useful from that perspective as well. At this point in our UX hiring design project, we're ready to move on to the design phase. This is where we'll carefully design and fine-tune our strategy, not just to seek, but also vet the candidates, so that you understand whether they meet your needs. In this phase, we'll start by designing the hiring process itself and the evaluation aspect of it. The main thing to remember is that the evaluation process, whatever you may decide, needs to be reasonable for the position that you're hiring for, but also rigorous enough to give you the data points that you identified in your candidate proto-persona definition. For a senior or a lead level role, I think I would recommend a structure like this. Now beware, a 3 to 4 part interview process with a design exercise and a comprehensive design evaluation may scare candidates away. To avoid that somewhat, maybe if you have any direct association or a strong reference that you trust, or maybe the experience is proven and you can eliminate one more or all of the steps as long as you feel comfortable. But I actually welcome a little bit of the attrition in the candidate pool as a result of this, because in my opinion, a discerning candidate will appreciate the rigor with which you evaluate somebody to add talent to your team, because that reflects how seriously your organization takes user experience. Also, I think that you possibly are looking for a confident candidate that can go through that evaluation process with a bring-it-on attitude anyways. So, starting off with the initial conversation, I'll keep this short here. The main idea is you want to get a broad confirmation about whether this candidate is a fit in terms of the organization, in terms of your project needs, etc., and whether that person is worthwhile bringing in for an elaborate round of in-person interviews. That's really what you want to do. The biggest decision that you want to make in your hiring process is decide if you want to have a design exercise or not, at hiring evaluation part of this process. Now, you can decide based on your proto-persona definition that maybe interviews and the portfolio review is enough. But I found that when you look at portfolios, it's hard to tell what parts of the portfolio are really the candidates' contributions versus their teams. So it's also sometimes candidates may not have had the time to put together a portfolio which also gives insight into their thinking behind the designs. So that is where I feel a design exercise becomes a consistent kind of a yardstick for evaluation. Now, if you do decide to have a design exercise, it can be a generic problem or it can be something that pertains to your product or service. Some people feel that if it does pertain to your product or service, it might represent a conflict of interest. Maybe you're having candidates do design for you. But you can get around that because there are some benefits. You can assign a problem that your team has already solved, but perhaps maybe it has not yet been implemented or something. But basically, if you did take this route, then the candidate gets the opportunity of playing with your product and getting a feel for the types of challenges that may be in store for them should they take up that role. One way or the other, the problem should not require too much of domain expertise because, of course, the candidate doesn't have the benefit that you did with the availability of subject matter experts as part of your role in the organization. The next biggest decision is whether it has to be an in-person exercise or a remote exercise. Again, pros and cons for both of these. If it is a remote exercise, the candidate the pressure is off, they can think about it in their own pace, they can process the problem, come back and present their ideas. For you as an employer, you get to see how they articulate their design thinking, how they're able to defend their designs, etc. Perhaps you'll also see a slightly more well-rounded design output. For an in-person exercise, I think the benefit is that the candidate doesn't have to spend any more time than what they are when they're already there at your site. And you get to see if they are able to grasp the problem quickly and if they're able to think on their feet, especially in the light of pressure. So again, the problem should be very specific, deliverables should be very clear. I recommend no more than 3 to 4 hours if it's a remote exercise and no more than an hour or so if it's an in-person exercise. Now at Ipswich, we had started doing with a remote exercise, and we actually noticed a drop in the candidates right after we scheduled interviews and the design exercise was sent to them. So instead of abandoning the design exercise altogether, we switched to an in-person exercise, and that worked out very well. And that also worked out very well because in our organization, smaller, fast-moving, we do a lot of whiteboarding and design happens quickly, so that was a format that was suitable as well. So once you do have the candidates come in for interviews, you want to make the most of that time that they're available. And I would suggest that you think about preparing for your interviews or structuring your interviews almost like a usability study, where you think about the format, metrics, methods, and also all the protocols that you might prepare for your study beforehand. I would start by designing the interview panel, and I suggest that most likely, for the most part, have one-on-ones or two-on-ones. That allows for the candidate not to feel intimidated, but also it allows for the interviewers to have the time then to delve into their concerns and get some insight in a short period of time. Depending on the size of your team, you may have to choose a subset of people and have more people attend the design presentation, design exercise. Also, this is not the only way. The interviews are one part of the hiring process. As I mentioned to you, the team can be invested in the goals early on in the process by contributing to the candidate persona definition as well. So here's a sample agenda of a round of interviews that we did at Ipswich. Again, the font may be too small for you, but I'll explain what this is. The important takeaway here is each slot is designed and acknowledges the fact that an interview process should be designed to determine a mutual fit. So there needs to be something that the candidate gets out of every slot and the employer gets out of every slot as well. So for instance, in the last session there, I paired a couple of researchers to do the interview slot because they can each benefit from the questions and answers that are asked in that session, and the candidate gets to understand how user research is done in your organization, for instance. Also, candidate experience is extremely important whether or not you hire somebody, because it reflects how your organization treats your talent. So with that in mind, I would say not more than 4 hours for any round of interviews, maybe 30 minutes for a one-on-one, 45 minutes for a group interview. And I realized that this is a short time for somebody to form a solid opinion about somebody. So that's where assigning focus areas is useful. And so when you debrief, you get a fuller picture about the candidate. Another idea is to have one person perhaps sit through all the sessions. You don't have to have that person be an active part of every session, but when they sit through and they have seen the candidate answer questions and handle different scenarios and situations for 2 or 3 hours, they get a much deeper insight into that candidate. So now if you have been selected to be on the interview panel, you have this very important job of collecting data around that focus area that has been assigned to you. So now with your UXer hat on, I would say go in with a broad plan. You don't need to have a script. It's like preparing for a user feedback session or a customer meeting or something, where you may not have a script that you're following like a formal usability study, but you're still prepared. You know what your concerns are going in, and you want to go get that information. And to prepare for it, I would highly recommend that you've already reviewed the resume and the portfolio so that you already know what you want to follow up. Also, you're the ambassador when you are in an interview, as an interviewer of your team and your organization. So be prepared to not just ask questions, but also answer questions that the candidate may have. Next, as in any design project, I think we need to be flexible to have our hiring process be able to be steered or tweaked based on how it's doing with respect to the goals that we want to follow. This is that testing, iterative aspect of design that we want to bring into our hiring effort. So in this part of my talk, I'll give you some quick examples of things that we changed and some lessons learned. As a UX hiring manager at Ipswich, I'm responsible for adding talent to my team. And so initially, I started by setting out to craft this hiring strategy on my own. And I quickly realized that there's a lot of strengths that I can leverage, even though I may still have to orchestrate the strategy. So I've already given you an example where you can bring in your team to identify what it is that we need for that project in the form of a new hire. Another example is leveraging the expertise that our researchers may have in conducting interviews and also in observing participants, maybe to do the harder behavioral interviews, that kind of stuff with the candidates. Also, another specific example I can give you is to leverage your new hires, people that have recently been through the hiring process, not just in your organization, but elsewhere as well. Maybe they have a host of ideas that resonated with them as a candidate, and you're able to incorporate that. Also at Ipswich, when we started, we did not have a design exercise in place, and so when we put one together, we piloted it internally with a recent hire. And this person had not worked on the project that the problem had pertained to. So we not just got feedback on the complexity and the scope of the problem and whether it felt right, but also on how common her experience was to be faced with a design exercise, and when a company did include that in their hiring process, how she felt about it. Another thing that we had neglected to do in crafting our hiring process was to design gates. And this is important because you don't want to waste the candidate's time nor the interviewer's time if there isn't a fit. So initially at Ipswich, we had a structure where we had all of these different parts, right? Design, exercise and presentation, UX interviews, stakeholder interviews, even some leaders who wanted to be part of the process, all on the same day, about 4 to 6 hours, like a marathon session. And then we had a candidate come in. Initial conversation was great, portfolio looked okay, but in the in-person interview, very early on, it became apparent to all of us that it was not a fit in terms of the organization. So we were in this awkward place where an agenda had been shared, but we had to cut it short. So to avoid such scenarios, again with candidate experience in mind, we then decided that maybe these need to be gates. If they didn't do very well in one, then maybe they don't move on to the next. And we also split it into 2 rounds. So again, with candidate experience in mind, if they didn't do very well with the design exercise, maybe we would still have the UX round of interviews, but keep it short and sweet. Now, in a company like Ipswich, again, which is, like I said, small and fast-moving, stakeholders are happy to be part of the UX hiring process, but they're very critical about the time that they spend. So you don't want to waste their time, and funnel all the candidates through them. So this allows you to have checked for their design chops. The team is fairly confident about this person that you're considering, and now they can use their time to pursue any concerns that they may have, whatever that may be, and you don't need to influence that. And also the candidate, on the other hand, feels like they've progressed even though they have to come back. And they get to meet some leaders, and that gives them some sense of the value that the organization holds for that position. So at this stage, you have a lot of rich data based on the interviews. And this is where we get into the next phase in design, which is measurement and analysis. In most places, you get the feedback either verbally or in an email. In one of the companies that I've been, we would get together and we would do a roundtable and debrief and share our concerns and perspectives. In other companies, you may have HR tools where you that funnels the feedback, and that may also include a rating scale. And that rating scale may be very broad and common to all positions. So you can collect feedback, however, in whatever form that you may already be doing. But the thing that I struggle with is how do you compare qualitative data like this? You have so much data. How do you come to a decision? This is where I'm looking to somehow quantify things a little bit. Again, I'm not looking to create an accurate, academically correct, or efficient quantitative scale. The sole purpose of the rating scale that I'm about to propose is to ground your decision making, right? So the final decision is still your judgment call, but it will help you to either analyze why you're leaning towards something, or if you're indecisive, then maybe help you come to a decision. Also, it can help you articulate your decision making so that you may share that should someone need to know the reasoning behind your decision making. So the candidate proto-persona has kind of served as an anchor throughout our process, and it's time to bring that back into focus. Again, after synthesis, to break this down again, here I assign a minimum score that any candidate that is considered for this position needs to achieve for each segment of my internal brief. This is a completely subjective score, but knowing the realities of my organization and project and teams, with that knowledge, it's my judgment that this is the minimum score that the candidate has to achieve. Now, this also helps me prioritize what attributes, even though it's already distilled, even amidst those attributes, what attributes are more important than others for the position that I'm hiring. And then I want to acknowledge that something like experience or culture fit, how do you put a number to that, right? What is 3 out of 5? It's hard. So this is where I think it will help to break this down even further. So for instance, if I take an attribute like experience, I break it down in as specific ways as I can, 5 or 7 things that will roll up to what I think or define as experience for this position. And for each of those, then it's slightly easier for me to then assign a minimum score. In here, you'll see 2 sets of scores because I was, like I said, hiring for 2 positions, a senior and a mid-level position. So now suddenly you have a rating scale. So if you can distill this down to 5 or 10 line items, then you can feel free to share that rating scale so that every interviewer, along with their qualitative feedback, can also complete this rating scale for you. Or if you are like me and I had a longer list, and when I showed that list to my manager, she was a little taken aback and she was a little worried that our stakeholders will be overwhelmed. So I completely acknowledge what is natural and helpful for you may seem extremely complicated and process-oriented for other people. So it's completely okay to keep it under the hood, but there's no need to abandon it. All you need to do is to adapt it. So in my case, what I did was I kept the rating scale private, and I just asked for feedback in any way that they had already been giving me the feedback, and I would translate that feedback into a score. And because I did the translation for all the candidates, it was still a consistent set of numbers. Again, nothing academic or correct about this. This is a tool, a personal tool for you to help you with your decision making. So also, just because you have a tool doesn't mean you have to force yourself to use it. For me, it became useful when I had 3 candidates that I was considering that seemed to be strong in slightly different ways. I have 2 of them sitting here actually that we used the process and there are the results. We're very happy with them. But basically at that point, it actually helped to use this rating scale. And this is what I did. So for each attribute, as I had already mentioned, I broke it down. And then I translated the interviewer feedback into scores at that level and then rolled it up to the top. And for the 3 candidates, I had the scores and the predefined minimum score that I had already assigned. And so I could not just compare the candidates, but I could also make some determinations. Oh, this candidate probably didn't meet my minimum score requirements. Now it's here that your judgment comes back into play. You can figure out whether this attribute, if these deficiencies are more than compensated with other attributes that were perhaps more important anyways in that internal brief that you had. Or maybe does it matter that the score was a little bit below the minimum? You can make all of those decisions. You can decide whether to agree with the numbers or disagree with it and make a different judgment call. It just gives you a framework to think about things. So to conclude my talk, I want to say that just as in user-centered design, where we keep our users' goals front and center throughout the design process, I think that we can keep our team, our project, and organizational goals front and center by taking some time early on to really crystallize what it is that we're looking for. And then finding a way to break it down into specific attributes that we can then refer back to in many different ways across the process, across your hiring process. Now, beyond specifics, I invite you to hang on to your UX design hats. It doesn't have to be a fancy hat, and you don't have to leave it behind in the lockers before you embark on that roller coaster journey that UX hiring is. As I'm hoping I've illustrated in my talk, that design hat can serve you well. Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions?
Mentioned to you with the design exercise, it's very much like any other design, right? Your first sketch is possibly not the best, or it has not hit upon every need. And that's true with the design exercise as well. That's why I think it's first of all important to pilot it, just like anything else. And you are very right. Over time, you do get those insights, and you begin to also tweak the design exercise a little bit. And if you are thinking about your hiring as a span of time rather than one candidate at a time, then it also gives you a way to then think about, okay, here are the various ways that somebody approach this problem, and how creative is one over the other, and make those judgments. So I think it is a tool that gets better with time.
On the same design exercise, so I'm very picky about the design exercise.
Yeah.
And what I found was, if I give a problem to a candidate, there are some who can do well,
Yeah.
and some who don't do well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in that process you miss out, because it could be that the person is very nervous,
Yes.
or it takes their own time to kind of come up with answers.
Yeah.
But what I found though, so a slight tweak to that, is that we have a collaborative design exercise, meaning we come up with a problem that we are facing, and we are actually actively working on, and we have 2 or 3 designers sit along with them, try to work this problem out. That way, we are able to gauge how collaborative this person is.
Yeah. That's a great idea.
How collaborative this
That is a
person
great
is.
idea.
How does he listen, or does he or she listen? I shouldn't say he. Does he or she listen?
Yeah.
And how good their ideas are.
Absolutely.
Are are they thinking more modern? Are they thinking something more?
Absolutely.
So
I agree with you on all those points, and I want to clarify that the design exercise is not your sole evaluation tool. It's one part of your evaluation. So before then, you've already spent an hour or more talking to that person, delving into their portfolio. People have taken the time to look at their portfolios, perhaps had phone interviews, things like that. So at that point, you already have an impression and you want to confirm or expand on it. So it is one aspect of evaluation, certainly should not be based on just that. And I think if you're also seasoned enough, then you are able to see potential and also count and factor for fear, nervousness, pressure, all of those things.